Shabbat Shalom and Gemar Chatima Tova. Best one yet. You'll get at least one more chance for the end of the service. So I want to do a little bit of English vocabulary quiz. I know that makes everybody tense up when they hear the word quiz. Don't worry, I'm not keeping score, and no one's getting graded on this. I just want to see how good you are at identifying some of the different potentially negative emotions and behaviors that we have, and the wonderful range of English words we have to describe them. We'll start off with something simple. The guy cuts you off in traffic, and you feel this hot, red emotion built up inside of you. You would call that anger, rage. All right, very good. You're doing a great job at your English. On the other hand, you are sitting at home and you are thinking about how you already have $500 million, but what you really want is $1 billion. Just more and more and more, and your eyes are lighting up and your heart is beating fast at the thought of being able to increase what you have. We'd call that greed. Very simple, very simple. On the other hand, you have your $500 million, and a small beggar child knocks at the door asking if you can possibly spare a crust of bread, and you recoil saying, "No, no, it's mine, it's mine." This would be selfishness. All right, you guys are doing great. On the other hand, you are that small beggar child, and you see the huge mansion in front, you see the mounds of gold coins behind the person inside, and you really, really, really wish that could be yours. This is? What's that? Jealousy or envy? Well, which is it? Both? Well, in the vernacular, is the fancy way of saying, the way common people talk, yes, it could be both. But technically, it's not. And this is a flaw of how we use English normally, compared to how English was established as it beat up other languages and stole pieces of them, and how we then try to read and translate from Hebrew into English, and the confusion it can cause. Everybody confused? Good. What is the difference between envy and jealousy in classical English, which is unfortunately the English that is usually used to translate the Torah? So envy is more the emotion that I was describing. When someone else has it and you want it, this is envy in classical English. So what is jealousy then? Jealousy is not exactly anger in classical English, although it is tinged with that. Jealousy is the suspicion that what you have, others are trying to take from you, and so you protect it with great energy and zeal. Right? Think of the classic, think of a usage like this: the dog jealously watched over his bone. Right? You couldn't say the dog enviously watched over his bone. We all recognize, hopefully, that that would be an English error. But to jealously protect something makes perfect sense in English. In fact, it is the more original usage of the word. To be jealous is to protect that which is yours from those who would take it from you, feeling, usually in the usage of this term, that those who would take it from you, of course, would be wrong to do so. Right? So to be jealous is to be worried that that which is yours will be taken. And in fact, this is usually the way jealousy is used in relationships. Right? If you are dating someone and they look longingly at a different person, you feel jealous. You don't feel envious. Right? Oh, I wish he looked at me like that. No. You feel jealous. So wait a minute, what's going on here? Is that person and my partner, am I going to lose that which is mine? Right? Am I going to lose that which is mine? And usually, and this is how it slips into modern casual usage, usually when we see somebody else with something that we think ought to be ours, we feel it's wrong that they have deprived us of it. And that is how we end up with jealousy sounding much like envy in many common usages. Right? I'm very jealous that he got the promotion. Really what I'm saying is not just I'm envious and wish it was me, it's I think it was illegitimate that he got it instead of me. If I'm jealous of someone else's success, usually it's because I think that somehow I have been cheated, not just that I wish I could trade places with them. So, Elkanah, God is a jealous God. What does it mean then? Is God going around saying, ooh, I wish I had that? Not so much. God's not exactly envious. So what does it mean? And you got a lot of examples in this week's Torah portion of Ha'azinu. That's an open question. Oh, all right. Just like our scenario of two people and one of them begins to cast eyes on someone else, and that first person feels a little aggrieved, so too God. God's like, I made the universe, I made you, and you've decided that you're going to ignore me and worship the sun? Well, I am afraid that I will lose you to something that is completely inappropriate, that I will lose your connection, your devotion, your worship, your love, whatever way you want to dress it up. God feels that we are in danger of drifting away, that God is in danger of losing that which is legitimately his, all of creation, us included. But there is a hierarchy to God's jealousy, because there is an underlying problem that we have to unwrap first, which is, why would God ever feel that this is in jeopardy? I mean, sure, if I'm out and, my significant other is making eyes at another person, that's the kind of thing that could perhaps be a real potential threat. But what can threaten God? Oh, no, you're worshiping a big rock. Oh, no, says God, please don't do that, because that big rock is such a threat to me. No, it's a rock. I'm God. Why would I feel threatened? The same way that if you are absolutely confident of yourself, jealousy is often not something that comes to mind, because who in the world would ever throw you aside? Oftentimes those are the people who do get thrown aside, but that's another story. We can make bad choices. In fact, the Torah is full of our bad choices. It would have been a much shorter book if we hadn't made so many bad choices. And sometimes, God recognizes, being God, that we could be completely stupid and pick the inferior thing to what we've got. That's absolutely right. Right. If we fall away from God, there's more at stake here than just who God gets to date. It is the lack of the fulfillment of the mission that God gave us with Torah, with the Brit, with the covenant. So now, is there a hierarchy, though, of how God is jealous? What I mean by that is, would you be more or less jealous of the Adonis that your significant other is making eyes at than you would at the Shlemiel that your significant other is making eyes at? Which one would you be more jealous of? The one that you think, this person should be on the cover of a fashion magazine, or this person breaks camera lenses. Who were you more jealous of? The camera lens breaker? Because?
There must be something more than meets the eye.
Because I could understand if they were looking at this other person like a piece of art. But if they're looking at him or her, and there's nothing worth looking at, then what's going on? I like your nice suspicious mind, because in fact, that is, according to our commentators, the way the hierarchy of God's jealousy works. Right? God looks at us and says, all right, some of you are going to end up worshiping the sun. I get it, says God, right? The sun is pretty amazing. I know, I made it. And it gives heat, it gives light, it gives all the energy that our entire planet has ever had. This is the ultimate source of life in a direct way for everyone on the planet. And for some of you to get a little caught up in that, I understand, says God. That is kind of impressive. You still shouldn't do it. Don't think this is permission. But at least I understand you're worshiping something that does legitimately have some power in its own way. It may be a reflection of my power, it may be created with my power, and therefore it is inferior to my power, but it does have a little oomph going for it. But Shedim? Nezikim? Right? Ketev Merari? These are terms that are used throughout Ha'azinu that refer to, you may have noticed the term in the English, demons. What is a demon in Judaism? Not what is a demon in pop culture, horns and pitchfork and all of that. In Judaism, what is a demon? What is a shade? Right? What are the nizikim? Evil? No. Distractors? No. Well, you can hear it more clearly if you know a little bit of Hebrew in the word nezikim. Right? What is nezek? Damage. They are damagers, right? These are the gremlins of life, to use a more modern English term, right? The shadim, say many commentators, comes from the word shadad, meaning to despoil or leave in ruin, right? This is entropy anthropomorphized. This is the forces of the nature that tear things down, right? I build a building, and I come back 15 years later, and all the mortar has turned to dust and the rocks have begun to slide. Why has that happened? Shadim. These are the demons that are chipping away at what we build, at what we do. The classic example in the Talmud is scholars have their trousers, and scholars are not out in the field, they're not working in the blacksmith, they're not grubbing around in the dirt, and yet their pants continue to wear out, just like everyone else's do. Why? Nezikim. Right? The demons are coming and removing threads and wearing it out. Now, does that mean they actually thought there were tiny little creatures that were going around invisibly and doing this? Maybe some did, maybe some didn't. But more importantly, they were capturing the true feeling that the universe kind of tears stuff down. That the law of entropy is rather inexorable. And the law of entropy is in opposition to God's law, in the sense that God wants us to build order and harmony, and there is a constant drag. That means we don't get to do it once and then relax. Every time we build something, we have to maintain it. And those forces were perceived as being anthropomorphized through the Shedim and Nezikim. And that, says God, that is much more offensive when people will worship those than when they will worship the sun or the moon or the stars or the mountains or something that at least has a magnificence and a power to it. How stupid do you have to be to worship that which is inherently corrosive, which is inherently destructive and inherently lacking in power to improve you? That, says God, is terrible. It would be like, to go back to our jealous example of two people who are dating, if one was to throw the other one aside and go out with a person that would abuse them, that would hit them and insult them and would take their money and betray them and cheat on them, and yet they stick with this person when they could have had you. This, says God, is much more offensive than if they were to throw me over for somebody that was at least not quite so bad. And he even points out that it seemed a unique feature of our people that we would go after these things. He said, other nations don't even do this. Nobody knows about these things. These are not like known entities that people worship. Sure, there's all sorts of stories in magic and sorcery of people trying to manipulate these forces to try and get their own end. But nobody actually worships these things because they're just corrosive. It's like worshiping rust. What are you getting from this relationship? Well, what we get is what we always hope. That we hope that we will be able, through some manipulation of this lesser force in the world, to be able to be the one actually in charge and to harm and damage that which is around us that we don't like. And unfortunately, this is one of the most dangerous emotions that we have. And it is one thing to be angry when the person cuts you off. It's another thing to be greedy when you feel that you need more. It's something else to be selfish and to turn a blind eye to someone else in need. But to have that corrosiveness, that you are willing to forsake God and even the sun and the natural elements to worship that which is only poisonous to the world, only in opposition to order and harmony, in the hope that somehow you can manipulate it to make the people around you worse off than you. Think of the mentality that there is. And yet, unfortunately, this is not a uniquely Jewish problem from Ha'azinu. Statistically, through research, we continue to find a sizable proportion of the world population that if you were to give them the option of working in a company where they would make 10% more than everyone else, but 50% less than they would if they worked at an alternative company where they made 10% less than their fellow workers, around 20 to 30% of the population will choose to be the big fish in the small pond, rather than to be the small fish in the big pond, to their own detriment. If I give you the option, say researchers, of taking $100 and the guy next to you gets 50, or I give you the option of you get 125, but the guy next to you gets 200, there is a large portion of the people that will choose option number A. Even though they are $25 behind, at least they're ahead of him. And this is the worshiping of the Shedim. This is the worshiping of Nezikin, of worshiping the damage done to others because it makes me feel better than them. And we can begin to understand how a fragment of our people coming out of the land of Egypt might have had this tempting feeling. Imagine having been slaves for 100+ years, having been in a foreign country for longer than that. Imagine having been pushed and bullied and forced to be delayed in your entry into your own homeland for 40 years, confronted by these other enemies. There will always be a certain percentage of people who fixate on, well, we may be bad, but I just wish they were worse. I wish they were worse off. I don't mind living like this as long as they live beneath me. And God is not going to answer a prayer like that. Even the sun and the moon are not going to answer prayers like that. They don't answer prayers, but it would be antithetical. The sun shines upon the whole world. But the concept of that which causes damage, there's my ally. There's my partner. Here is someone or something or a force that represents the bitterness I feel, that represents the resentment I have, that I am willing to harm myself in order that I can harm someone else more. And thus God turns in Ha'azinu and says, this is the ultimate stupidity. I have offered you everything. I have offered you a path to lift up the world, and yes, that will mean some of the people you don't like will be lifted up too. And at that you balk. Because how dare, with the rising of the world, the people you don't like also improve their lot? That is what makes you flee from me, says God, and go off to worship these no gods, these things without power, these things that are only poisonous and corrosive. How dare you? This is God's jealousy. It is understandable that our people would make this mistake. It is understandable that people continue to make this mistake. But it is only when we confront the mistake for what it is that people have this tendency. They have this seed within them. And it's only when we are willing to raise them up and show them that there is a better way to live for them and those that they resent, that we will truly be able to worship God as one world, as one people. It is my fervent wish for this new year of 5781 that we spend more of our time and energy on worshiping God and less on pursuing the demons. Shabbat Shalom and Gemar Chatimat Tova.